y'all. Welcome to That Tennessee Feeling. I appreciate you guys are awesome. Don't forget you can find That Tennessee Feeling on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. I did finally get all the podcasts uploaded to YouTube, so you can listen to them there. I love getting to know you guys and my fellow Tennesseans. If you guys have a suggestion for the podcast, just reach out. I have an email. It's thattnfeeling@gmail.com. You can comment on any of the posts, any of the social media. I love just when people say hi, or if you just want to tell me like, hey, I really want to hear an episode on this. I'd love to hear from you guys. Also, don't forget, I am part of Unfiltered Studios. So if you guys want to take a second to go over there and check out some other podcasts, please do so. You find some amazing podcasts and people. So today we're going to talk about a park up in the east part of Tennessee. We're going to talk about Sycamore Shoals State Historic Park. It is actually located in Elizabethton. It is obviously in the far corner of Tennessee. The park actually consists of about 70 acres, and it is situated along the Sycamore Shoals and the Watauga River. It is also a National Historic Landmark, where a series of critical events that took place that had to do with the establishment of the states of Tennessee and Kentucky and the settlement of the Trans-Appalachian frontier in general. Pretty much that's just kind of where it started, and that's where it took place. It's also got some history to do with the American Revolutionary War. So it's a very historic area. Proud to be in Tennessee. Along with the historic shoals, the park includes a visitor center, a museum, the reconstructed Fort Watauga, the Carter House, which is not exactly in the park. It's a satellite location actually in Elizabethton. And then Sabine Hill, which is also a satellite location in Elizabethton. But this is all a really cool state historic park that calls Tennessee home. And I thought that it would be really cool to talk about it today. So this part of Tennessee has a lot of history, as I just told y'all. I mean, even before the European settlers came over, the Sycamore Shoals and the adjacent lands had been all inhabited by the Native Americans. The first permanent European settlers arrived somewhere around 1770 and established the Watauga Association, one of the first written constitutional governments west of the Appalachian Mountains. And that was done in 1772. Richard Henderson and Daniel Boone, yes, that Daniel Boone, negotiated the Treaty of Sycamore Shoals in 1775, which saw the sale of millions of acres of Cherokee lands in both Kentucky and Tennessee and led to the building of the Wilderness Road. During the American Revolution, Sycamore Shoals was both the site of Fort Watauga, where part of a Cherokee invasion was thwarted in 1776, and the mustering ground for the Overmountain Men in 1780. Again, a lot of history in this area, y'all. The visitor center at Sycamore Shoals houses interpretive displays about the area's history. There's a theater that offers free screenings of a short documentary film narrated by John Cullum about the Overmountain Men and the Revolutionary War history about the area as well. Of course, the park also has its offices and gift shop. And I think the coolest part of this park is that the fact that there is a reconstruction of Fort Watauga. The fort originally built as Fort Caswell in the mid-1770s, but it is Fort Watauga, and I think it's cool that they took the time to reconstruct that to show what it would have looked like in the Revolutionary War. The reconstructed fort's design, of course, is based on archaeological finds, and it just kind of shows forts what it looked like in the Appalachian frontier. Of course, adjacent to the fort is a 450-seat amphitheater, which is the site of the official outdoor drama of the state of Tennessee. And it's called Liberty, the Saga of the Sycamore Shoals, formerly billed as the Wataugans. So it's kind of cool that there is like an official drama. Of course, there's also picnic facilities located at the visitor center. So the state park is kind of one of those you can go and you can spend all day and you can learn a ton of history about it, y'all. The park is also home to the 2 Mile Loop, It's a graveled mountain river trail that follows a partially wooded south bank of the Sycamore Shoals of the Watauga River. Of course, there are interpretive signs along the trail that kind of explain the various historical events that would have taken place along the shoals. The Sycamore Shoals State Historic Park is also the recipient of Sycamore Moon Tree. It's called the Moon Tree. I had to look that up because I was like, what? And it's kind of cool. And so the Moon Tree was grown from one of hundreds of tree seeds that were launched into space on board the Apollo 14 mission in 1971 as a joint project between NASA and the U.S. Forest Service. So in this park is one of the moon trees, and I thought that was really cool. The seeds were actually germinated by the Forest Service when they were brought back to Earth, and this tree was planted in the Sycamore Shoals State Historic Park in April of 1976, and it was part of the celebration of the United States bicentennial. So that park actually has one of the moon trees in it, and I thought that was really cool too. So you find all kind of things in this park. Now, of course, the park is kind of broken up into different areas. You have the main park area, and that consists of the historic shoals, the visitor center that I kind of talked about, a picnic area, and of course the reconstructed Fort Watauga. It's located on the west side of the city of Elizabethton, and it's right on the river. I mean, it's right along the river. Great views. And I may not be saying this right. I always was heard it was Fort Watauga, and it was Fort Caswell. Was a fortification located in Watauga. Sycamore, and it's located in the Watauga River, Sycamore Shoals, which would be modern day Elizabethton. It was constructed from 1775 to 1776 by the Watauga Association, a semi-autonomous government founded by American settlers living in and near the river. That's what it said. I don't know how they lived in the river, but that's what the sources all said. So I guess some of them lived in the river. I don't know. And they did this really to defend the settlers from attacks, because at that time, the British had gotten the Indians to be allied with them to attack the settlers, because, of course, this is right around the time of the American Revolutionary War. Now, of course, the fort was originally named Fort Caswell after the governor of North Carolina, Richard Caswell. But in the 1970s, as part of the United States bicentennial celebration, the government of Tennessee authorized the reconstruction of Fort Watauga. A group of archaeologists conducted excavations in the Sycamore Shoals area to uncover several trenches, having been believed to be part of the fort's walls. The fort was then rebuilt based on information gained through these digs, and descriptions of the fort in several historical sources, and the general design based on Appalachian forts based on that time frame. And it is now the part in the main park that you can see. Now, of course, all this is based on that Watauga settlement. So during the late 1760s, the Anglo-American colonists began to establish settlements in Holston, Watauga, and the Nolichucky River valleys in the southwest region of the British colony of Virginia. Along the Watauga River, white settlers were drawn down to Watauga Old Fields, which is an ancient Indian gathering place. The Watauga Old Fields consisted of flat, cleared land along the Sycamore Shoals, which would be modern-day Elizabethton today. And this was a relatively low stretch of the Watauga River where colonist explorers would be able to cross with ease, so it wasn't very deep, and they could easily either walk across or float across. Now, the settlers quickly came into conflict with the Cherokee and other Indian tribes, which had actually traditionally used this region as a hunting ground, and of course, this was met with a lot of conflict. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 and several subsequent treaties placed the boundary of the British-controlled territory at the southern fork of the Holston River, and in the early 1770s, the Anglo-American settlers outside this boundaries were ordered by the Crown to leave. Though the settlers leased their lands from Cherokee chiefs in 1772 and actually officially purchased it in 1775, they were ordered to leave as these agreements actually violated the 1763 proclamation. In addition, A Cherokee faction led by young chief Dragging Canoe vehemently opposed the sale of tribal lands to colonists. He didn't believe in it. He didn't want his land sold. And he also threatened to attack any settlers in the region. So he just didn't like the fact that people were coming into his lands. So in 1774 and 1775, both British Indian Department official John Stewart and the governor of North Carolina, Josiah Martin, issued repeated calls for settlers south of Holston to leave the area. They knew that it was going to get dangerous, and they didn't want any extra conflict, as they already knew that the U.S. and the British, well, what would be the U.S. and the British, were already going to have conflict with themselves, and it was just going to be bad all the way around. Well, in July of 1776, there was a Cherokee invasion. The outbreak of the American Revolutionary War had already happened in 1775. And this actually only added really tense situations to the Appalachian frontier. Settlers along the Watauga and Nolichucky River pretty much supported the Patriot cause. They weren't really loyalists to Britain. And this really kind of added problems to a lot of things because the Indians were allied with the British. They had already been told to leave, and now there's just more problems. So basically, they formed a committee of safety along with founding the Washington District. So in January of 1776, Dragging Canoe and the British forged a further alliance. And in April of that year, British agents actually supplied the Cherokee with a large cache of weapons that they could use in attacks against the American colonists, especially in this Watauga area. Now the Cherokee were well armed, mad, and they had an ally. So they were going to send a message to the settlers along the Watauga River. They actually told them first, they gave them 20 days to leave, or they were going to attack them. So they gave them a warning. Settlers, meanwhile, had been anticipating this attack. They knew that this was coming. They just didn't know when. Now they knew they had 20 days. They undertook various preparation measures, which included buying weapons and ammunition via the Fincastle County, Virginia Committee of Safety. They gathered plenty of rations, including food and medicine. They constructed and strengthened various fortifications in the regions, including walls and other types of fortifications. One of these forts was actually Fort Caswell, which would be Watauga, and they named it after the governor of North Carolina, Richard Caswell. In early July of 1775, a Cherokee woman, Nancy Ward, actually tipped off the Cherokee attack plans to American trader Isaac Thomas. Sorry, that was supposed to be July 1776. Sorry. Nancy Ward had tipped off the plans to American trader Isaac Thomas, who then told the news to John Sevier. Oh, funny, John Sevier. Sorry. Who was at the Nolichucky settlement near what would be modern-day Limestone, and he was actually overseeing the construction of Fort Lee. The news alarmed the settlers, told most of them to flee. Most of them went to Fort Caswell, and Sevier also to flee, and Fort Lee was never completed. The Cherokee invasion actually began mid-July of 1776. When the invaders reached the Nolichucky, a contingent led by the chief known as the Raven, they split off towards Carter's Valley, which would be Kingsport today, where he chased away settlers and burned their cabins and farms. Two contingents led by Dragging Canoe and Old Abraham of Chilhowie proceeded up the Nolichucky, where they burned the abandoned Fort Lee. This force then continued to split, with Dragging Canoe marching north to attack on Holston settlements and Old Abraham marching to attack on Watauga. As Dragging Canoe approached Easton Station in the vicinity of Holston, the fort's garrison, led by Captain John Thomas, feared the Cherokee would bypass the fort and destroy their farms, marched to engage them on the island flats. In this, 13 Cherokee were killed, and dozens, including Dragging Canoe himself, were wounded, forcing the Cherokee to retreat. With the Cherokee approaching, some 150 to 200 settlers were crowded into Fort Caswell. The fort's garrison consisted of roughly 75 men under the command of John Carter, who was actually the Committee of Safety Commissioner, with James Robertson and John Sevier as his subordinates. Old Abraham of Chilhowie's contingent of Cherokee warriors actually arrived at Caswell in the early morning hours of July 21st. So they apparently marched all night for what was supposed to be a surprise attack. Well, the sudden appearance of the invaders actually surprised the women milking cows, forcing them to rush back inside the fort. One of them, Catherine Bonnie Kate Sherrill, future wife of John Sevier, was unable to get back before the gate was locked and had to be pulled over by John Sevier himself. That poor woman. The initial Cherokee attack only lasted about 3 hours, both sides exchanging gunfire. During the attack, several Cherokees managed to get close enough to the fort to actually attempt to set fire, but were forced back after Anne Robertson Johnson, sister of James Robertson, continued to throw hot water on them. That woman was fearless. Unable to take the fort, the Cherokee finally halted their assault and settled for a retreat after a lengthy siege. In the ensuing days, a teenager named Tom Moore was captured outside the fort and taken to Tuskegee, where he was burned at the stake. Another captive, Lydia Russell Bean, wife of early settler William Bean, was going to meet the same fate when Nancy Ward intervened and used her authority as beloved woman to spare her. After approximately 2 weeks, the Cherokees lifted the siege and retreated. The arrival of the Virginia militia under William Christian later that year largely ended the threat to the fort. And all this is also going on, by the way, while the American Revolution is happening further north. In 1780, the Overmountain Men, the frontier militia that had helped defeat an army of British loyalists in the Battle of Kings Mountain, mustered at Sycamore Shoals on the grounds around Fort Watauga. After this event, the fort largely vanished from historical records, but you could still kind of see it on land deeds as late as 1819 to 1820, depending on which source you talked about. So it kind of just disappears from history at this point, y'all. In 1909, the Daughters of the American Revolution placed a monument near the site of the fort, and then it was largely forgotten again. In the mid-1970s, this is when the state of Tennessee reconstructed the fort in anticipation of the nation's 1976 bicentennial celebrations. The state funded the archaeological excavations and research to determine the exact location and design. The Watauga Historical Association, that had already been formed 20 years earlier in the late 1950s, was actually instrumental in the creation of the Sycamore Shoals State Historic Park. 19th century historian J.G.M. Ramsey, I guess he wanted all the letters, provided the most often cited description of Fort Watauga in his Annals of Tennessee, which was actually published in 1852. Ramsey, who visited Elizabethton, observed what he believed were to be the fort's remains at one point. He placed the fort's location approximately half a mile northeast of the mouth of Gap Creek, along with what would now be the intersection of West G Street and Monument Place. The site is marked by the 1909 DAR monument. A contemporary and corresponding friend of Ramsey, Wisconsin historian Lyman C. Draper, placed Fort Watauga, though, at a different location, approximately a mile downstream from the mouth of the Doe River, 2 miles northeast of Ramsey's location. At that point is the outfield of Joe O'Brien Field, which is south of the Watauga River. So there is conflicting about where they actually think it is. The Ramsey location at Fort Watauga also places the Stockade Fort 2 miles further west from the historic homesteads of John Carter, John Sevier, and James Robertson, who were the militia leaders during the Cherokee siege of Fort Watauga in July of 1776. So none of these people actually know where it is, but somehow they figured it out and were able to do digs to find the walls. Either way, the early Tennessee explorers and pioneer James Robertson, though, was the first to build his homestead during the 1770 and 1771 years along the north side of the Watauga River at the mouth of the Doe River. Draper, though, also recorded that the historic site of Fort Watauga was located approximately 4 miles from the Sevier location, John Sevier's plantation, which they have approximate location of, which was located near the mouth of the Stony Creek, south of the Watauga River in Lynn Valley. So basically, nobody knows. Little detail is known of actually the original design of Fort Watauga, because it wasn't like they could take a picture back then, y'all. Ramsay described the fort as situated on a knoll. Draper wrote that it was surrounded by an open glade within easy firing distance of the north bank of the Watauga River. The 1974 state excavations, though, uncovered partial trench-like formations 300 feet west of the DAR marker that state archaeologist Carl Cutruff believed to be the remains of Fort Watauga based on Ramsay's description alone. So he probably was the closest to figure out the location. The 1974 excavations revealed that the fort had an irregular shape, and it probably consisted of a group of cabins connected by a stockade. The shape of the reconstructed fort was based largely on the formations uncovered due to these excavations, and also looking at other Appalachian, however you want to say it. And by the way, if you ever correct a Southerner or an Appalachian on how we say it, you are in for some good, you're going to hear it. Contemporary Appalachian frontier forts. So basically they looked at all the other forts in the area and they took what they thought would have it looked like. Also based on what they dug up. They also thought that there was a stockade of sharpened poles around the courtyard, and then they reconstructed what they thought it looked like. And that's how you get what you see today. So basically they don't know, they took their best guess. Sounds about right. You also have the Carter Mansion, which is part of the Shoals National Park. It's listed on the National Register for Historic Places. It's built between 1775 and 1780. And the Carter Mansion may be the only surviving material link to the actual Watauga Association. And it is the oldest frame house actually standing in Tennessee. John Carter and his son Landon actually built the Frontier Mansion, and its finely detailed interior with the over-mantel paintings place the mansion among one of the most significant historic houses in Tennessee. So basically, if you ever want to know what the original settlers in Tennessee lived in, what it would have looked like, go see this. Go see the Carter Mansion up in Elizabethton. That is the best piece of preserved history you're going to find. John and Landon Carter were both prominent political and military affair. They were the most prominent people in Tennessee to deal with this. They were both prominent in political and military. They served both the American Revolutionary War, and they had several conflicts with the Native Americans in the area. When Tennessee was actually admitted into the United States in 1796, Carter County was immediately named for Landon Carter, with the county seat for Elizabethton being named for his wife, Elizabeth Macklin Carter. It is located on the east side of the city of Elizabethton. And this was officially added to the park on November 1st, 2017. The Sabine Hill home was also added on the same date. This has huge significant settlements, especially for the colonial settlement, because this whole area is just like original Appalachia and original Tennessee. The flatlands around Sycamore Shoals have been sporadically inhabited, of course, by the Native Americans for thousands of years and were cultivated during the Mississippian period, which is about 1000 to 1600. And, of course, when the first European explorers arrived to the area in the early 18th century, the Cherokee were using them as a gathering place for hunting expeditions. In the 1760s, long hunters and traders would have also established stations and hunting areas in the Watauga Valley in the vicinity of the shoals. These early explorers called the flats the Watauga Old Fields due to their resemblance to the once cultivated lands that had been left to just reclaim. In 1770, James Robertson, later the founder of Nashville, made an excursion into the Watauga Valley, possibly to locate the settlement sites that would eventually become what it is today. Also, they were fleeing the turmoil of the regulator movement in North Carolina, because James Robertson actually came out of North Carolina. A trader pointed Robertson to the old fields, and Robertson actually described them as the promised land. They planted corn, built cabins, and settled there after departing North Carolina. And this is where him and several other families would establish the Watauga settlement. And then after surveyors placed the Watauga settlement and other south of Holston settlements officially within the domain of the Cherokee tribe in 71, this is when Robertson actually negotiated for the 10-year lease in the Watauga lands. Even though it was outside of any British colonies, the Watauga settlers established kind of their own constitutional government and called themselves the Watauga Association. Tragedy, though, tragedy happens, as the lease was being celebrated when a Cherokee warrior was murdered by a white man. The only reason that 10-year thing actually lasted up until, up until the problems in the 1775, 1776. So it lasted for 4 to 5 years, even though this man was murdered while they were celebrating, was because Robertson was able to actually diplomatically make peace with the Cherokee. But they also knew that at any point they could be expelled by force if necessary. So it was an uneasy settlement, but nonetheless, they made it work until the British came along and just ruined it for them. Now, of course, the area did have its ups and downs with the Native Americans, but also the American Revolution. In March of 1775, the Treaty of Sycamore Shoals happened, and this is actually called the Transylvania Purchase. Random naming. It was signed by Richard Henderson and the Cherokee leader that I'm not going to pronounce. I will butcher that. That was not taught to me in school, y'all. The treaty involved the purchase of some 20 million acres of land between the Kentucky and Cumberland rivers, which actually includes what is now a large part of Kentucky and Tennessee. Henderson's purchase, though, was actually in violation of that royal proclamation in 1763, however, which prohibited the purchase of any Native American lands. The purchase, nevertheless, led to the blazing of the Wilderness Road by Daniel Boone, which I talked about in the beginning of the podcast episode. In the weeks following, though, the Treaty of the Sycamore Shoals, a faction of the Cherokee did oppose it by dragging canoe, which is what led to the invasion in 1776. But due to that invasion, on September 25th, 4 years later in 1780, Sycamore Shoals and the Watauga was still the staging area for the Overmountain Men, which was the frontier militia that crossed the mountains to engage and defeat the army of the British Loyalists in the Battle of Kings Mountain in South Carolina. The Overmountain Men had also fought in the siege of Charleston. These are what one historian dubbed the first Tennessee Volunteers, y'all. That's where it comes from. That's where you get the Vols. And the Battle of Musgrove Mill, both in 1780, and participated in 2 campaigns against the Cherokees. Again, the Overmountain Men fought in 1776 and 1780 before going to become in the Siege of Charleston and Kings Mountain. William Tatham, the Watauga Association clerk and drafter of the Watauga Petition, was also present at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. Now, the Shoals have a ton of history, but it is also a great place to go to just be out in nature. The Watauga River is something beautiful to look at. There is an amazing nature to see if you go to, just to go out and be in nature. It's, Yes, it's Elizabethton. Yes, it gets cold in the winter, so maybe don't go quite in the winter. But you can see some really cool stuff in this park. You know, they have, the Honey Project, which is really to encourage, the wild flowers to grow and pollinate the bees. You can see the Carter Mansion that I talked about, which is really the original oldest frame house built in Tennessee, and that's some amazing history. You can see the interpretive programs. You can rent a venue. You can go and have a picnic. You can hike the trails. You can see some wildlife. It's an amazing park if you just want to go and be out in nature. It's one of those parks that you can make it a whole day, or you can just stop by and see it for a couple hours. The Sabine Hill House is also, like I said, a part of it. It is also offsite. It is also another really good example of a wood framed federal architecture house. It was constructed in 1818 by Mary Patton Taylor, widow of Brigadier General Nathaniel Taylor. It is a really, really cool old house. You can see the grist mill. You can see, because this lady, as a widow, she continued to really work this farm. She had a huge farm, and she continued to live at Sabine Hill until her death in 1853. So years after her husband's death. And, they were actually going to demolish this house in 2007, but it was actually saved by the community. Literally 1 week shy of being demolished, the citizens decided to go to the state of Tennessee, and the state decided to purchase it. And then it became a historical property. And so it was added to the state park, and it officially opened to the public in 2017. Another really, really cool site if you want to see how original Tennesseans or Appalachians would have lived back in the day. So this park is just a really, really cool park that you can just go to, and you can explore. You can learn about history. You can learn about the original Appalachians. Spend a day in nature, spend a day learning about history. And of course, the park does have yearly events. They have traditional art workshops from January to December, so all year round. Garrison and Living History weekends, again, January to December. Sunday jams at the Carter Mansion in Shoals, that's January to October. Mountain River concerts, January to October. Muster at Fort Watauga, that's in May. Native American Festival in June. Colonial Kids Day Camp in June. Liberty, the Saga of Sycamore Shoals, the official outdoor drama of the state of Tennessee, in July. Watauga Valley Art League art show and competition in July. Carter Mansion celebration in August. Over Mountain Victory Trail celebration in September. Fort Watauga Nappin in October. And mysterious candlelight tours of the Carter Mansion in October. Also another really cool thing to do. There are some great views, again, off the shoals of the Watauga River. You can, like I said, you can reserve pavilions. There are picnic tables and places to eat. The park is a very large park. You can roam, like I said, the trail. It's literally right next to Elizabethton. So you're going to see the city or the town. You're going to see the park. You're going to see nature. It's just a really cool park that I really wanted to talk about, especially with all of its history dating back to really early United States and Appalachia. I hope that the next time you're in that quarter of Tennessee, you guys will check out such a historical part of the state. All right, guys. Remember, if you have an idea for an episode, reach out. If you just want to say hi, reach out. If you have a second and you wouldn't mind giving me 5 stars on Apple or Spotify, I would really appreciate it. Be nice to one another, and as always, guys, stay country.
This podcast is a production of Unfiltered Studios. If you would like to know more about joining Unfiltered Studios, please visit our website at unfpod.com for more information.